Namaskar, a very hearty welcome to the 8th session in the series of Fireside Chats brought to you by Team Cradle. The tough time brought about by the pandemic continues, but amidst all the pain, all the loss and misery, we are getting to hear stories of strength, stories of resilience, stories of hope and compassion. These stories and your love, my dear audience, gives us the motivation to move ahead with our sessions as a part of the Cradle Initiative. We have, as a part of the initiative, we have always tried to talk, to discuss on topics related to life, related to growth. Whenever we talk about life and growth, one important aspect that comes to mind, important aspect that impacts life and growth is obviously learning, education. Are we really learning the right way? How the present education system compares to what we had in the past? Is unlearning as important as learning? Can we really imbibe the spirit of being lifelong learners? We will talk about all this in our topic this evening, which is learning, unlearning, and growth, exploring the connect. I'm very happy and humbled at the same time to be joined by a very esteemed guest to discuss the topic with me. May I please have him on screen? Yes, right there, you are seeing Dr. Biplab Lohochoudary. He is a senior professor associated with the prestigious Bharati University, Shantiniketan. He has over 26 years of experience, rich experience in the field of education as a practitioner, specifically in the area of mass communication and journalism. Dr. Biplab also has been a visiting faculty in various universities in India as well as abroad. Dr. Biplab takes active interest in the field of school education as well and has provided thought leadership in this area. It is my privilege, my pleasure to welcome you, sir, to this session today, and I'm looking forward to have an enriching conversation with you.
It's my privilege also to be with Cradle, which has taken a great initiative.
Thank you, sir. So without much ado, I will jump straight to the topic. And our topic today is, as you have seen, is on learning, is on education. What, according to you, Dr. Biplab, is the basic objective of education? Inviting your thoughts.
Right. That's the basic question we are still riddled with. And on that, educationists, researchers, spiritual men, philosophers, scientists, and who not has dealt deep. But going by the dominant trend, we can look into the basic objective of education in two ways. The first is, if we consider the industrial model of education, where education is getting input, having a throughput, and then as an output, some services, some products, some HR talents will fit in the juggernaut of the industry and the economy. Then the basic objective of education, you can understand, is to plan the manpower. So here, in this objective of education, we have only considered human being as providing labor, providing talent, and everything we look from the angle of resources, which can be monetized. And our all pride, all prejudice are around it. If you look into the other side of the object, both in East and the West, we find that education is to have our all potentials bloom. So they don't consider that one is to be prepared for some job, etc., etc. If one is efficient, if one's behavior is right, if one's character is right, if one's skill development is quite normal, and the talent is unfurling with time, then he would naturally or she would naturally be having a good way to life and growth. This object of education takes us to an holistic approach. And the other object takes us to a segmented approach. We are considered only as Homo economicus, economic man. But that cannot be the object of education in totality. And we have seen that our great philosophers and spiritual thinkers and socio-spiritual reformers in the present age, like Gandhiji, Rishi Aurobindo, Thakur Anukul Chandra, and many others, hinting at that. And to top it, Swami Vivekananda, Sister Nivedita.
Absolutely.
So, education's object is very, very important. What we want actually with our children, with our future generation. On the basis of that, the object of education, every education policy decides.
Sure. Brilliant perspectives out there, Dr. Biplab. So you talked about the industrial model of education, which focuses on human beings as of generating employability. So employability is the focus of industrial model of education. But then you are very vehemently saying that the true objective of education, which has been talked about by philosophers, by spiritual guides, by thought leaders, is rather building of a holistic human being, which comprises of different aspects of our being and character. And you took the name of the likes of Swami Vivekananda also, who said, education is the manifestation of perfection already in man. And similarly, my spiritual master, my spiritual guide, Sri Thakur says, education in its real form is to unfold the characteristic faculties that are latent within. So I thought I would just add on to the flow of thoughts and we will discuss about it.
Yeah. See, in the Indian approach, not only in Indian approach, if you look into any Oriental approach, education is prime in life of people. Education is prime in life of people. And the education always began from the family. Before going into this, I would just want to talk about the American education policy making in the first half of 20th century. Their National Education Policy Commission had in 1937 prepared a report. In page 44, they lamented that our families are getting broken due to our policy of the state for a long time, And the community strength, the local strength, the local resource strength is going down. So, in view of this, our education should stress more on individualism. But at the same time, they try to make a balance between the individualism and the ethnocentrism, patriotism. They tried to make it. Because for a country like United States, it was very important with people of so many different culture coming together and a history of decimating the Red Indians to create the country. There was certainly some need of strictness. This was there. Now to your question, when we look, Sri Thakur Anukul Chandra also talked about education is to edit experience. Education is to edit experience. Now, not only he, there are many others across the globe who told this. The current education system, when we talk about current education system, we have to divide it into two. One is, which began with the British coming to India, destroying its occupational caste training institutions, family-based institutions, trying to replace Sanskrit and other rich languages with English, trying to make people feel inferior to the Britishers. Now it's very, very interesting. The same British or any European country, when we talk about their development, this development was mostly from within. They were not mostly attacked by people. And their tribes gradually came together. But they could not make very big countries. On the other hand, India is a continuous civilization. You take anything, see Panini's grammar, that Gandhar grammarian, Panini's grammar of 450 BC was much before the scientific inquiry into structure of any phenomenon was established anywhere in the world.
Right.
If you look into science also, you'd be able to find it. Now the question is, did we do justice to it in the education system till now we are in? No. But now, with the new education system, there is an understanding we are going to really make our own education. One thing you have to understand, that India always believed in acculturation, coming of cultures. By doing its own national education policy, which has the purpose of creating holistic education for wholesome personality. Wholesome personality. For that, it has suggested the pedagogy is very important in education. See, ultimately,
Right.
the teacher is very important and teacher's training is very important. So what is that pedagogy we talked about? In India's national education policy, the pedagogy is very important. I just read. It should be experiential. If you look into ancient Indian education, it was through experiences and insights from experiences. which formed the core of education. The time the children were at home and the time children were at the Tapovanas or other places. And it should be inquiry driven. This is the India where the Prashno Upanishada was written. Much, much before the other parts of the world had anything like that. So how to question? It's very interesting. And this is at least 1000 years before Christ. Just consider. Even before the Mahabharata war, the Prashno Upanishad. So we are now stressing on inquiry driven, holistic, integrated, and learner centric education.
Yes.
We are now going to, and it will be flexible. We always boasted of flexibility in education in the West. So we, even after 6 months of our undergrad, we can go and have a certificate and come back.
Tremendous change. Yes.
Right. In 1 year, taking a diploma, go, work in the field and come back.
Right. Absolutely.
And in 3 years, you have a degree. So it's very interesting all over the world. So we are not shedding anything. Rather, we are adapting to things also which are good from the world because it is Bharata's tradition.
Absolutely.
So this is what the India's education system is going to be. And all the plans are afoot. And everyone is chipping into it.
Very nice. Very nice to learn about it. And it is also a moment of pride, I would say, as we reflect on the education system which was there before. And it is, we always hear that when people in different parts of the world were roaming in the jungles, were staying in caves, a full-fledged civilization was running in India. And we talked about the Prashna Upanishad and the likes. And India has always been the cradle of learning and development. You also touched upon a very, very important nuances when you said that in India, in Indian system of education, it was always about the experiential method of learning, which maybe we are trying to again bring forth with the new education policy. And even now I'm a part of the corporate and I lead a couple of learning and development charters for an MNC. And precisely even in the corporates currently we are talking about experiential method of learning. We are talking about learning by doing. And I remember a very famous saying by Benjamin Franklin, who said on learning, tell me and I forget. Uh, Teach me, and I may remember. Involve me, and I learn. So the experiential method of learning is about involving the learner. And that is what I would say, is one aspect of being learner-centric. When I am concerned about what my learner's preferences are, what my learner wants, and based on that I design my systems, I design my processes, I design my content of learning. Thank you for bringing this point up, Dr. Biplab. So moving on, if you look in the current context, the new age media is coming up, is rampant rather. So how do you see the impact of the new age media on our education systems, processes, and content, everything? How do you see the change and impact?
Prior to discussing it, I would like to tell you the entire Turing's machine, that is computer, it is based on a logic which has been derived from Panini and from Jaimini's Purva Mimamsa, one of the philosophies of India. So these two very important aspects. One thing we have to understand, that computer and the new media, on the wings of World Wide Web, are actually making the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the entire world is a nest, that it is making into a reality in the virtual mode.
Yes, can't agree more.
But the ecosystem of education, what we found at the higher level of education, people trudged miles after miles, hundreds and thousands of miles to learn, like Yuan Sang came to Nalanda through the Silk Route. Very interesting. And when he was going back, he took a shipload of books. And when there was a storm, the captain told that you leave these books because these are making us weighty. There's a ship. He said, no, this is what will make my country learn. Make my country learn. And he said, you can board me off from the ship, but reach these books to my country. Now, with the new media, we can reach any knowledge, any wisdom to any part of the world. This is the advantage. But what is its impact on the ecosystem? In the world, education, we know, requires a living ideal. It requires a living ideal. A screen cannot be a living ideal. Or a teacher from the screen cannot be a living ideal. Because the conduct of the teacher, the behavior of the teacher, and the mesmerizing glue in his glib talk, and the passion for the children, the common orientation with the students, these are basically the paths of learning. Yes, in new media, ICT-based education, all these are tried, but it cannot be done. The touch of nimble hands of a student with that of the teacher is something what we are missing. We can have emojis, emoticons, everything.
Yes.
Now the challenge is, not at every level of our education it would be a full-fledged one through which education should be there. But for a distressed time when we cannot come together, it should be there. And there should always be a preparedness in our education system to have an integration of online and offline. We need
what we
to
call the blended method. What we call the blended method of education.
Blended. But at the same time, what would be the methods of blending? What would be the methods of blending? What would be the best method of blending? What should be the cultural conditioning of such blendings?
We have to think about
these are very important points on which any education policy or any educational institution should stress more. That is very important. Otherwise, it would be very drab. It would be as if we are doing our duty. That sort of a matter comes. And the ideal of a teacher is very difficult to reflect through an online YouTube video,
yes,
or in any other platform.
Yes, yes. And Dr. Biplab, this brings to mind a story which I have heard about a conversation. You are talking about the importance of an ideal teacher. So this brings to mind a conversation which happened between my spiritual guide, Sri Sri Thakur Anukul Chandra, and an eminent educationist of that time, D.S. Kothari. So D.S. Kothari was in a conversation with Sri Sri Thakur, and he was talking about the state of indiscipline in the students across the universities and educational setup. And so Sri Thakur told him, and he was asking how to make the people, students, disciplined, because discipline is very important in education. So Sri Thakur told that discipline comes from the root word disciple. So if we really have to make students disciplined, the learners disciplined, we have to make them disciples first. They have to become disciples first, and after that, they automatically will become disciplined. Now, out of interest, Mr. Kothari asked him that you are talking about disciple, but whom they should follow, whose disciple they should be. Then Sri Thakur said that a disciple of the ideal teacher, a living ideal. So adherence to a living ideal, to a teacher, and by following the diktats of the living ideal, by looking at how the living ideal or the acharya in Indian, in the parlance, Sanskrit parlance, the student has to learn and imbibe the spirit, the imbibe on how he or she has to conduct himself or herself. And Sri Thakur also in one of his messages, and I would like to quote, he says, the basic foundation of education, the basic foundation of education is love, devotion, and active service that centers around a spiritual guide. So I thought, since you brought this important point of the importance of teacher, I would just add on to it. So now, continuing with our conversation, if you talked about, teacher being a stakeholder in the education. Now, apart from the teacher, there are various other stakeholders in this entire scheme of learning. Whose role, Dr. Biplab, you think is the most critical, and why?
It depends on how you, from which perspective you are looking into education. To my mind, and following science, the neural science, it is the student who is the most important stakeholder. But that does not mean I am putting responsibilities on them. Why it is? Because the entire education has a purpose to create next generation of citizens. In whatever way you look into it. And now, these children are having an open mind. If you are not blocking it from the very beginning. See, the problems in the world are of blocked minds. You block mind with dogma, you get dogma. And out of dogma, you get extremisms. That's why I told you the student is the most important stakeholder. Because he is who receives it, whose neural process of mind processes it, creates imageries, stores imageries, stacks it in right cerebrum and left cerebrum. And then out of these he acts or she acts. So he is the most important person. We often forget it. In our haste, in the industrial model, to show that the teacher is very important or an administrator is very important, we forget it.
But what about the parents? But what I understand that the learner himself or herself.
I'm coming.
So what is the role of the parents?
See, a child gets, when he or she is born, all the genetic complements are from the father and mother. And from the very beginning, he or she has a very open mind. So he starts learning. Perhaps learning is the most natural process in the world, like that of breathing. Like that of breathing. One has to breathe learning from the very beginning. How?
Profound statement.
How? See, the parents, we have the role. We have a role. Even I was talking about the US policymakers lament. They say that the family and the parents, their role has dwindled due to shifting. Fortunately, in our country, family is not broken. Divorce is not highly encouraged in our country, especially in rural areas and in urban areas, people with some modest training. The final part of it is when parents have a very, very generous conduct and they are very much courteous and they are civilized and they are respectful to their seniors, respectful to the country, logical, rational, they would normally create an educational milieu in children. Because ultimately, within 8 years of our age, this brain has 80 to 90% of neurons developed. Neuron development means development of memory. These are not only cells, which is nothing. That's why it is told we have conscious, subconscious and unconscious. In the process of development, from unconscious it goes to conscious. Our sadhana is to bring more and more neurons to that conscious level. It's very important. So parents' role is very important. And parents' ideal-centric life. What is ideal-centric life? In every one of us, in everyone's life, we have different lusts, greeds. We have different types of sentimentalities, everything we have. Emotions, basic instincts, everything. When these emotion, the site of emotion is amygdala in our brain. When this is being captured by better ideas, living embodiments of better ideas, the ideas of enlargement, which in the Indian context we call Brahman or Bipro, who fulfills everything, everyone. Unlike the today's criticism of the Brahmins having the 9 capacities, 9 traits, which is to be developed. Everyone should become a Brahmin. Should become a Brahmin. Means having the, what we call generosity. Then the ability to pardon. The ability to control people. The ability to not usurp any other's property or any other's occupation and excel in one's occupation, to advise people for proper life, etc., etc. So every one of us has that ambition. If we shift us as parents from the ambition of having children with lakhs and lakhs of rupees income to that of to be a good person who has normal abilities to work for anything, that is very important. And then comes the teacher's role. He or she is the best teacher who is better as a parent. I would talk about common orientation, the theory of common orientation from Bharat Muni's Natya Shastra, Sadharanikaran. A teacher's best quality, how he or she comes. He has rich knowledge, wisdom, and he has to teach someone who has less of it. But then, from there, he comes to their level. He comes to their level. So, he has a common orientation with them. He knows their problems. He knows their liking. So, teacher is very, very important. Subhash Chandra Bose in his IS interview, it's an anecdote. He said that station master minds the train and a teacher trains the mind.
Trains the mind.
Mind is
Yeah, my
a
father
very
always
dynamic
talks about
process.
this. Yeah.
Very
Uh,
dynamic process.
yes. A station master minds the train. A schoolmaster trains the mind. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. I have heard about this. My father always talks about it. So, brilliant perspectives out there. You have talked about the role of a teacher, you have talked about the role of a parent. And there is a book written by my spiritual guide, Sri Thakur, which is called The Women's Code. Okay, it is basically because Sri Thakur considered women as very, very special. He considered that the role of women in the society is very, very important. And that's why we are privileged to get a book from his side on how we should really conduct ourselves. So, in this book, I have read that he talks about this age of 5 to 10 on the values, the kind of education, the kind of learning we are able to instill in the kid in this age that stays on for the entire life of the kid. And that is precisely, I think, what you are also hinting at from a scientific point of view, wherein you are saying that by the age of 8, most of the neurons are formed, right? You also talked about the ideal centricity of the parents, which definitely has the appropriate impact on the development of a child. Thank you for bringing this perspective. So Sri Sri Thakur also, he has given us many important messages in the form of rhymes. Okay, and as we are talking on education, one such rhyme comes to mind. While the original rhyme obviously is in Bengali, but I have made an attempt to translate it to English. Please correct me if I go wrong somewhere. So Sri Sri Thakur says, expertise in reading and writing, education you may not call. Without habits, behavior, and common sense, there is no education at all. So precisely the same thing which we have been talking right from the start, that education is not merely gaining in some bits of information from here and there. It is about character building. It is about building common sense. It is reflected in our habits and behavior. Habits and behavior are the index, are the reflection of true education. So another thing, we talked about education, we talked about the role of parent, teachers. So one thing currently, and especially since I come from the corporate, we get to hear a lot of buzz around unlearning and relearning. So what are your thoughts on this, Dr. Biplab?
Let us look into it from neural point of view, because that's an established science. And India has a very great basis on inquiries. I talked about Panini. See, if the science is correct, within 8 years of age, most of our neurons are developed. And our memories are formed. Our impressions are created in amygdala. So the base point of a corporate training actually happens in parental home. Right? If you look into Erickson's model of education also, there also you find it. Whether a boy or girl would be fearful or not in the later life in taking challenges, that is already decided in this age. Whether you'd be considering any avocation as ignominious or prestigious, that is also, because everything is impressionistic. The images are made, the mental images are made in our brain, in our everyday. See what I am today. Within my 8 years of age, most of the things have been done. And then within 10, especially for women, as you have talked about, Sri Thakur and Kulchandra, that by that time, from the time of their playing with toys, family toys, marriage, etc., they have formed their ideas. Right? Cooking toys. There are many, many other things. Many other things. So my point of view is, see, from the very beginning of our life, we are actually learning. What is told here is how this learning through propaganda or through non-confirmations and having more data, more information, which contradicts the earlier one, how we can turn that man into a person with a different mindset. That is de-learning and then relearning.
Sure.
But consider, is it possible that you can drive away all those neural images, etc.?
Not
So
possible.
in corporates, with much of the training, actually much of the things does not happen. It's a
Very,
record.
very strong points out here. Very strong
What
point.
actually happens? I would like to give you example from the house of Tata. It is the compassionate behavior of the owner. It is a compassionate behavior of the management. It is an understanding and the love created, which actually drives the employees. And look into very robust employee hiring regimes, which actually stresses the qualities already inherent in man.
Yes,
So
yes.
let us have a theory that all corporate trainings are actually done in the family. So why not under CSR, the corporates take responsibility in their surroundings of say 500, 600, 1000 families, not in terms of money, but in terms of interaction with parents and finding ways how good things can be done.
Yeah,
Right?
absolutely.
It's
Brilliant
very
perspective.
interesting.
Brilliant perspective. And in the interest of time, well, I will move ahead, but I'm sure our today's chat, today's discussion, people from the corporate India are also watching us. So I would request my audience to mull over this, to contemplate this with when you think about your learning and development charter, as well as how as a part of your CSR activities you really can go and play an important part in the early education of our people. And again, I think Dr. Biplab is stressing on the early education. And that is why, again, there are many parents and teachers who are watching our discussion today. So I'm sure they have got enough food for thought in terms of how to go
Before
about
you
that.
ask me next question, I have a simple point. Even in our
Yes.
country, there is not much effort, even in the new education system, to bring the parental education. So we need to develop a model onto it, where parents have the position of pride. Even the poorest of the parents, because even poorest of the parents has that heat which actually makes a child grow with warmth. That warmth is very much important.
Absolutely. Can't agree more. And one story comes to mind very shortly. I will try to say, because we were talking so much about behavior, character building, and stuff like that. So my father was telling me this story the other day. He was saying that so earlier, right, we used to do this rote learning. So a boy is reading. We have to respect our parents. We have to respect our parents. He was reading in the book. So at that time, the mother is telling the kid, "Hey, why are you moving your leg as you are, reading?" So pat comes the reply. "How can you give me a command, you woman?" So while he was actually reading that you have to respect parents, but when the mother advised him on something, he is responding back in a inappropriate manner. So which shows that how it is important to involve an experiential method of learning, which you talked about, and the conduct of the parents themselves, the conduct of the teachers themselves, which play a role in early education. Moving on. So in our cradle sessions, we always talk about life and growth. And even as I started the session today, I talked about learning and its linked to and its link to growth. So I would want to invite your thoughts on how do you see education, learning as the linkage to growth. Inviting your thoughts, how it is connected to our growth.
Okay. With growth. It depends on how you define growth. From a country's perspective or from a family's perspective, would you like to define it as how big is my building? For the country, the per capita income, the gross domestic product, or the gross happiness index? How you want to define? See, in this, on this earth, no definition of growth can be complete because growth is a pluridimensional phenomenon. It's a pluridimensional phenomenon. And there cannot be a single way to it. The problem is West developed in their own way from within. Take the case of USA or Europe, especially USA, they had the Monroe's doctrine of isolation. Till they grew big, their companies started big production, so they required market outside. So they had Monroe's doctrine of isolation. In isolation, they were growing. But then from the 1940 ends, they started thrusting their model on others because already they found it as a market. So marketing of ideas will normally bring the marketing of technology, instruments, etc., and power. So the point here is that growth cannot be looked from the one angle. India, from the very beginning, I'm just talking about giving the example of India till 1780 and then till 1830. Till 1830, just consider the case of Bengal. Bengal was producing 1/3 of the GDP of India, and India was actually third highest GDP producing country in the world. Right? Very rich. Very rich. And all this happened by their inner growth. Inner growth. Their exports were never that other things will come to our country and then it will go back. So, the question of growth, now as the call of Atmanirbhar Bharat is there, but even before that we had that sort of calls. Rabindranath Tagore talked about rural reconstruction on the basis of the strength of society. What we are doing? Mahatma Gandhi asked for Panchayati Raj because he wanted mini republics. He wanted decentralization. But what we are doing? Basically, in the name of decentralization, the political election, the political parties are creating caste of 2 parties or 3 parties. And the crux is the 3 crore or 4 crore rupees that goes to Panchayat every year. That has to be shared. We'll have the part of it. So the point is, Tagore also talked about it. And Tagore did his own experiment. Gandhi did it in Gram Swaraj, started the Khadi movement, Bhudan, etc. Today also we have that Atmanirbhar Bharat. But what is the model of Atmanirbhar? That will be defined by your approach to growth. How you to the world, it is now very important to have transgenerational sustainable development. And that should be ecologically sustainable.
Brilliant.
We can call it ESTGP. Ecologically sustainable transgenerational progress. And in fact, this is the Indian model of development from the very beginning, from the start of our civilization. And they learned from the destruction of Harappan urban centers due to excessive urbanization, cutting of woods, raining the rivers, etc., etc. So India developed a policy that in both sides of river, within say 500 meters, there should not be any house. That was a very, very old Indian policy. But we had broken that in the name of urbanization. So we need to think in terms of us. Just consider cow. So much of talk about cow. You know why cow is so important? 80% of the DNA of cow and human being is the same. So the chemicals that are secreted in their many parts of the body, pancreas, liver, etc., etc., it has the same composition like that of human beings. Many hormones. Very interesting. The holistic approach should also not only include others, human beings, it should also include the nature,
Absolutely. The entire ecosystem.
entire ecosystem. And India showed that in its different Upanishads, Brihadaranya, Shvetashvetar Upanishad, etc., etc., we find the mention of it. We
Sure.
find the mention of it. So it's not
Think-
growth, it's progress. Progress. And it should be ecologically sustainable transgeneration. Transgeneration means in my generation I have progress, my next generation has gone down, become a clerk, then it's not a progress. And also, the garden that I have, it has been destroyed by them. They have built houses. No, it's not progress. We have to be with all very happy, with snake, with mouse, with everything.
Absolutely. And you talked about right at the start, right? Vasudeva Kutumbakam. And we also say that Madatma Sarva Bhutatma, right? That me is just an extension. Others as we see as extension of my own self. So I think it is the same thing you are talking about. And I think that is what maybe the true objective of education is, the realization. And Sri Thakur says, what we achieve out of realization is actually wisdom. He talks about it in the holy book Satyanusaran. And in every session of mine, I talk about this very powerful, power packed book, Satyanusaran. And I would encourage my audience today to read
Yes,
about it. And
wisdom
another,
is transhistoric.
yes,
Wisdom is transhistoric. See, there are two aspects. In any knowledge, any information, there are two aspects. One is universal and another is discrete. Discrete is useful for now. Universal is useful for the entirety of human.
yes. And that is
Right?
where you're also talking about a sustainable growth, right? Transgenerational sustainable development. And that is what you give us a very holistic definition of growth as well. Well, we have our own perceptions of growth.
I tell you, I give you an example from Philippines. Sorry, Indonesia. There is an Indonesian fishermen group. What they do, you know, cormorant, you know, they culture cormorant. Why? Because these cormorants are helping them in fishing. These cormorants are taken as what we call tops in Bengali, for attracting the fish. Fish comes and they have a rich haul. And then what they do, you know, they give some fishes to that cormorant colony. Very interesting.
Interesting,
Very
interesting
interesting.
indeed.
Nature
Right.
has everything. Or you talk about the Nicobaris. During the
Interesting.
tsunami, sorry, Sentinelese. During the tsunami, you know, they had no devastation. All the other islands were devastated. And all our civilization, the great cities, etc., everything. But they did not have any devastation because their transgenerational knowledge, the wisdom, the sensor that they have, natural sensor in their own minds. They understood that it is coming, they prepared themselves. So would
Absolutely.
you tell
Brilliant
it is knowledge
example.
or our natural disaster management things? Even after that, we cannot protect ourselves from disaster. That is knowledge.
Brilliant. Brilliant
So
example.
we
Brilliant
cannot
example.
ignore it.
Out there.
Cannot ignore
I'm
it.
actually tempted to continue my conversation with you, but I'm having a strict watch on my clock as well. So, in the interest of time, I will stop my questions at this point in time and invite a question from the audience, please. May I please have the audience question on screen? I think we have exhausted almost an hour, but definitely a lot of learning from the discussion. May I please have an audience question on screen? Okay, let me read out. Okay, so uh, Kea Sil, thank you for asking this question. You are saying the discussion looks very interesting. Thank you. The aspects of experiential learning sounds very thought-provoking. But why today's rote learning can't incorporate same knowledge-based transformation? Why mechanically learning something can't get inside one's subconscious mind and transform at instinct level? Brilliant question. Your take on it, Dr. Biplab.
It is always told educated parents. Education is not literature or having great degrees, diplomas, etc., or doctorates. Educated parents are a blessing for a country. Why it is told? Because in a classroom setting, the 40 students cannot be offered experiential learning at a level which is very individual. But to some extent, if the teacher is very able, he can, through common orientation, understand the cultural conditions and family aspects of students and create thought-provoking examples, anecdotes, etc. But the experiential learning would only arise when a child has very, very good experience in his own life from the beginning. Seeing mother to do great things, seeing father to offer some contribution to some good words, discussing good points, and having health and hygiene. Much of the death during this COVID was due to that we did not experience Shastra and Sadachar. Shastra and Sadachar. We did not.
Health and
And
hygiene.
we had a very bad food habit. Very bad food habit, fast food, etc., etc. Because we have become lazy. See, the experiential learning cannot come out of laziness. And in any education system which is mechanical, the showing of performance, the marks are very important. So teachers are also time bound. Now the teachers should be given independence, which in the new education policy it is told about, so that they can, like our earlier Tapuvana systems and the universe systems in Nalanda, Takshila, Vikramshila, etc., Vallavi, etc. These are all proven facts. Like that, they can have their own way of taking exams, so that the fear of exam is gone, and students are introduced to more and more experiential through fieldwork, etc. Not only
Yes.
fieldwork, even within class, you can create experiential learning.
Yes.
See, in my communication class, what I do, I give them a play that is, I have developed it, that stimulus response play, right? From their memory, they have to, from their memorable memory and memorable part, favorable memory, and from their bad memory, they have to bring out 2 episodes of their life. And then they have to discover what was the stimulus and what was the response, and how they can alter it. We teachers need to be very, very creative actually. We need to make use of our right part of the cerebrum, which is creative. And also we need to, for that, we need to study
Yes.
more. We need to
Sure.
be psychologists. Not by training in psychology we can be that. It's love for my student,
Yes,
which
brilliant.
can include experiential learning.
Thank you so much. And that is precisely what we also are trying to do in the corporates. I myself, take a lot of, trainings for the leadership in my organization. And pretty much the similar thing which we try to inculcate, learning by doing, giving them, case studies, giving them scenarios, giving them role plays and seeing them, how they
But
really
there is a
go
difference.
about
There
it.
is a difference. See, every person is unique. So as a teacher or trainer, you have to evolve, giving them tweak their experiential paths as per their own tradition, their
Yes,
basic instincts, their traits, etc.
yes, yes. Thank you.
That is
Thank you
very
for
important.
Thank you for adding on. Let me quickly, go to the next question, please. Yes, so we have a question from Mr. Deepak Kumar Das. How to align and amend the unlearning of a tender age of a child in adulthood or at a later stage of life? So I think you touched upon it. Maybe you can throw some more light on it.
Okay,
How to
okay,
align
okay.
and amend the unlearning of a tender age of a child in adulthood?
Unlearning of a tender age of a child, it means we are going against science. To 90% of our brain, we are going against science. And this is the reason most of our youth and aged persons, aged means within 40, 50 years, have much of anxieties, much of our blood pressures, heart, etc. Because we are trying to bring them from the normal to artificial. Why not our education be geared, whatever they have learned from their families, parents, if they are a good parenting. Yes, if they have a bad parenting, good examples should be brought to them so that they can believe that the world is much larger than what their parents have offered. And I pity those parents because they were not trained properly. The only way to do this, see, there are another some 10% which can grow up to a later stage of life, of our neural development, up to a later stage. Why not you stress on that 10%? Because actually, most of us only make use of, say, 10% or 20% of our neural resources. And who are very good make use of 30, 40%. And the most brilliant makes use of 50% maximum. So you have still the 10%, Deepak, Mr. Das, you have still the 10% on which you can work if you want to make them unlearn what they learned at the tender age. But it is always important. In every negative, there is a positive. Why not you turn this into a positive? If a child has a habit of telling lies, why not you start such a course of action as a parent that his intensity to tell a lie comes down, but without disturbing the growth of his personality. That's very important. And in a future also, it's very important. I am
Sure.
learning also
Thank
how
you.
to
I
keep
think
silent.
that's a very positive outlook, Dr. Biplab. One last question we will take, and then we will conclude the session today because I think we have overshot the estimated time already. We are at 9:34 now. So one last question, maybe please put on the screen, and then we will conclude the session. Yeah. So I have a question on my screen from Sudhanand Prasad. How can you distinguish constructive and destructive learning in education? Dr. Biplab,
Okay,
please.
right. See, if you look into the Trinity of India, right? Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwar, you have both the constructive and the destructive components. Without learning both, you cannot be a right personality. Right personality. Now the question is, how far you will take destructive learning? I have an example. See, we all know about Otto Hahn, we know about the atom bomb. if those scientists were guided in their research by Kopila's Sankhya Darshan, which talks about 5 stages to decide on which topic you will do research, or on which problem, or which misery, they would have stopped much before. The problem of today's learning is, in the haste of making money, we want to give everything in package. And we destroy the natural instincts of people. Just consider, we are a very, very hot country. And in our northern India, and even now in Bengal, when someone goes for marriage, have tie, suits and boots obtained from the Britishers. And you know why the tie came in the Middle Age Europe? They wanted to, after they took suits, they wanted to actually wipe out their face. That is where from the tie originated. Just consider. Mimicking is a destructive learning. So distinction, you have to make it in your own life practices. What you have to unlearn. Don't take anything as granted. Then you are really following the Prashnopanishad, the Indian tradition. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much. So this pretty much brings us to the end of our session today. Thank you so much, Dr. Biplab, for being with us. I would like to end today's discussion with one message from my spiritual guide, Sri Thakur, when he says about education. And we talked about it right through our session today. He says that where education does not collaborate with character and conduct, it is merely an induction of knowledge. So what we are seeing around us, or what we perhaps have also gone through, is merely induction of knowledge. Let us come out of it. Let us come out of it. Let us not merely tick the check boxes of reading and writing. Let us learn through doing and discerning. Let love, devotion, and active service be the base of our learning. Let us all have a guru or an acharya. Let us form the attachment towards our acharya, and in the process form concentric habits, behaviors. And let these habits and behaviors be the index of our education. Let these habits, behavior, and conduct be the reflection of our learning. Best wishes to all of you. Let us all move forward and imbibe this true spirit of learning and be lifelong learners. Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you, Dr. Biplab. This is Tanaya signing off with the promise to come back again with another session from the house of Team Cradle. Thank you, and good night to people in India, and to the rest of the globe. You have a good rest of the day. Thank you. Bye-bye. Namaskar.